I 25M, have lived in my brother James's, 23M, shadow my entire life. He's always been treated like God's gift to humanity, while I'm basically the invisible kid nobody gives a crap about. It's been this way since we were kids. I still remember winning first place in the state art competition back in 8th grade. I spent weeks perfecting this mixed media piece about environmental conservation. When I came home with the blue ribbon, my mom just said, "That's nice, dear," and went right back to helping James with his history project due the next day. He got a C+ on it, and they took him out for ice cream to celebrate his hard work. Christmas was always a complete joke in our house. James's pile of presents would reach the ceiling, all the latest tech, designer clothes, whatever he'd been whining about for months. My pile? Maybe some practical gifts, like a basic drawing tablet if I was lucky. Mom would get this smug look, like she deserved a medal for buying me art supplies while James got the newest iPhone. Dad was always in his home office with James, teaching him about business plans or helping with his entrepreneurship projects. Meanwhile, I'd be alone in my room, watching YouTube tutorials to learn Adobe software because nobody had time to help me. Whenever I asked Dad for guidance, it was always, in a minute that somehow stretched into years. Eventually, I stopped asking. The golden child treatment went way beyond gifts and attention. James would literally crash Mom's car and they'd shrug it off, "Accidents happen, honey." But if I missed a family dinner because I was working late on a freelance project, I'd get grounded for disrespecting family time. When we were 16 and 14, James went through this phase where he'd take my stuff without asking. One time he took my graphics tablet to school, borrowed it without permission, and someone stole it from his backpack. When I got mad, my parents told me I needed to be more understanding, because he was going through a tough time. The tough time? He didn't get elected class president. They never replaced my tablet, but 2 weeks later James had a brand new MacBook Pro because he needed it for his school projects. I figured out pretty early that nobody in our house had my back except me. So I shut up, kept my head down, and worked my ass off. Got my first job doing basic graphic design for a local print shop, saved every penny, and started learning advanced design skills from online courses and industry forums. I didn't need their validation anyway. My parents had this blind spot that was exactly my size and shape. They'd remember to stock James's favorite snacks, but forget I had a gluten intolerance. They'd drive 4 hours to see his business club presentations, but couldn't be bothered to attend my first solo art exhibition because parking downtown is such a hassle. Here's where my grandfather Joe, 72M, comes into the story. Grandpa Joe was the only one who ever really saw me. Ironically, he was my dad's father, a former art director who'd worked on major campaigns in the 70s and 80s. While my parents were busy fawning over James's mediocre business proposals, I'd be at Grandpa's studio, learning about color theory, typography, and brand identity. Those were the days I actually felt like someone gave a damn about me. "You've got something special in those hands, kid," he'd tell me while we worked on design projects together. "Your dad never had the eye for this stuff. Always too busy chasing the next big business scheme." He'd shake his head like he couldn't quite figure out where he went wrong with his son. Grandpa saw right through my parents' favoritism BS. This one time when I was 15, my parents completely forgot my birthday, not just forgot to get a cake, but literally forgot it was happening. They remembered James had a debate club competition the next day, and the whole family had to go support him. Mom actually said, "Oh, it's your birthday tomorrow, isn't it? We'll celebrate next weekend." They didn't even get me a card. When Grandpa found out, he was livid. Showed up at our house that night with a professional-grade drawing tablet wrapped in newspaper. "Happy birthday, kiddo," he said loud enough for my parents to hear from the kitchen. Some talents are worth celebrating properly. Every Christmas, when I'd open those practically gifts from my parents, basic art supplies, whatever, Grandpa would sneak me something real. Professional design software, high-end equipment, the kind of tools I still use today. One year my parents actually complained about it. Mom had the nerve to say, "He doesn't need to be spoiled, Joe." Like decent design tools were equivalent to the new car James had just unwrapped for his 16th birthday. Grandpa just stared her down like she was an idiot. Recognizing talent ain't spoiling. It's investing. Then he winked at me. When I was 21, fresh out of college with my design degree, Grandpa called me over to his studio. He had something for me, not just another piece of equipment, but an actual plan. He'd been watching the design industry evolve, he said, and thought I was ready to make my mark. That's when he pulled out this old portfolio from his glory days. Inside was a brand concept he'd never got to launch, Greystone Design. I registered this name 30 years ago, he told me, but never did anything with it. Been saving it for someone with the right vision. Then he handed me the trademark paperwork. It's yours now, kid. Build something great. I spent every spare moment over the next year developing the brand. Taught myself web design, learned about e-commerce, created a whole collection of original designs. Between freelance gigs, I'd work late into the night, building my portfolio and planning the launch. My room became this crazy mix of sketches, mood boards, and empty coffee cups. The brand concept was simple but powerful, minimalist designs with hidden meanings, each piece telling a story. I started with a small collection of graphic tees and prints, all produced locally. Launched the website on a shoestring budget, mostly through word of mouth and social media marketing I did myself. Then something crazy happened, it actually took off. A local lifestyle blogger wore one of my designs to an event, and suddenly my inbox was flooded. The hidden meanings in the designs resonated with people. Orders started pouring in, and within 6 months, I had to rent a small studio space to keep up with demand. My parents barely noticed, of course. Mom just kept asking when I was going to get a real job. Meanwhile, they were throwing parties every time James's latest dropshipping scheme launched, even though none of them ever lasted more than a month. But Grandpa? He was there every step of the way, offering advice, helping me navigate contracts, teaching me everything he knew about building a brand with integrity. We were actually planning to expand into a full lifestyle collection when everything went sideways. Grandpa got diagnosed with Parkinson's. News hit us hard, obviously he couldn't work with design tools anymore. He called me up one weekend, said he needed to discuss something important about the brand's future. But before we could meet, I had to head to Michigan to help my aunt deal with some of his medical arrangements. What happened while I was away, that's why I'm writing this post. I spent 2 weeks in Michigan, making sure Grandpa got settled into his new medical routine. During that time, I kept the business running remotely, shipping orders, answering customer emails, working on new designs from my laptop. Everything seemed fine, until I got this weird email from one of my suppliers asking about the new business structure. When I called to clarify, they dropped a bomb. Someone had submitted paperwork changing the ownership of Greystone Design. My heart stopped when they said the new owner's name, James. I immediately tried calling home. Mom picked up, acting all casual like nothing was wrong. When I demanded to know what was going on with my brand, she got this condescending tone, "Oh, we were going to discuss that when you got back. James has some wonderful ideas for expanding the business." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "It's my brand," I said. "I built it from nothing. You can't just give it to James." That's when Dad got on the phone. "Actually," he said, using his explaining business to an idiot voice, "the ownership has already been legally transferred. James needs a solid business foundation for his MBA applications, and your little design project is perfect. He has the business acumen to take it mainstream." My little design project? Are you kidding me? I have contracts, customers, a whole brand identity I created. How did you even transfer ownership without my signature? There was this pause, and I swear my blood ran cold when Dad responded, "We handled the paperwork. As your parents, we have your best interests at heart." They had forged my signature. My own parents had actually forged my signature to steal my business and give it to James. When I said I was calling a lawyer, Dad's tone changed completely. "Don't be dramatic," he snapped. "This is a family matter. James will let you stay involved in the creative side. He just needs something impressive for his applications, and this way, the business stays in the family." I hung up and immediately called my friend Chris, whose dad happens to be a business lawyer. Chris came to pick me up from the bus station when I got back from Michigan, saying I shouldn't go home until we figured out our legal options. That night, while I was crashed on Chris's couch, the texts started rolling in. Mom, you're being selfish. Dad, family supports family. James, I'll make you head of design, you should be grateful. Grateful. Like I should thank them for stealing everything I built. Chris's dad, Tom, 55M, sat us down and laid out exactly how screwed my family was. Forgery, fraud, theft of intellectual property, we're talking serious criminal charges. But he warned me to think carefully about pressing charges against my own family. Once you start this process, he said, there's no going back. I thought about all the years of being ignored, dismissed, pushed aside. About how they'd always chosen James, every single time. About Grandpa believing in me when no one else would. About my brand, my vision, my work, my future. Do it, I said. File everything. Operation Takedown started the next morning. First stop, the trademark office. Sure enough, there was my signature on the transfer documents, dated exactly when I was in Michigan helping Grandpa. I had literal proof I was 500 miles away when I supposedly signed those papers. But we didn't stop there. I had everything documented, every receipt, every design file, every piece of evidence showing Greystone was my creation. Text messages from my parents acknowledging it was my business. Emails with suppliers. The original trademark transfer from Grandpa. Even my aunt provided security camera footage from the Michigan hospital showing I was there when the documents were supposedly signed. Meanwhile, my phone was blowing up with messages from my family. They evolved from angry, "How dare you not answer our calls," to guilt-tripping, "We're so worried about you," to manipulation, "If you love your brother, you'll come home and we can sort this out as a family." I didn't respond to any of it. I was done talking. What they'd done went way beyond their usual favoritism, this was criminal. Tom filed police reports for forgery and fraud, plus civil suits for theft of intellectual property and damages. James had already started making changes to my brand. My carefully curated aesthetic was being replaced with generic dropshipping merchandise. My original designs were being phased out for cheap knockoffs. Everything I'd built was being dismantled by someone who couldn't tell Helvetica from Comic Sans. That's when my parents played their final card. Mom left this tearful voicemail, "James needs this for his future. Why can't you support your brother just this once? Just this once?" Like I hadn't spent my entire life being pushed aside for James? That voicemail made my decision crystal clear. I texted back a single line, "You chose him over me for the last time." The police took my case seriously, way more seriously than my family expected. 2 weeks after filing reports, officers showed up at James's apartment to seize business assets. But they found something even worse. He'd already started removing trademark identifiers from my designs, planning to register them as his own. That's when things got real. Criminal charges were filed, not just against James for intellectual property theft, but against my parents for forgery and fraud. The local paper even ran a story, "Family charged in design brand theft scheme." My parents' faces were right there on the front page of the business section. Dad's accounting firm put him on leave pending investigation. Mom's phone started blowing up with calls from her gossipy church friends. James's MBA applications? Those weren't happening anymore. Their perfect family image was crumbling, and suddenly their messages changed. "This will ruin James's future. Mom. The legal fees are draining our savings. Dad. I thought we were family. James." I stayed at Chris's place while it all went down. His dad Tom helped me regain control of my brand, but the damage was done. I knew I could never trust my family again. Not after this. I'm heading back to Michigan tomorrow to stay with Grandpa Joe. He needs help with his treatment anyway, and I can run my business from anywhere. At least he's always believed in me. My phone's blowing up with messages from relatives taking sides. Right now, I don't care. My family made their choice, they chose James over me one too many times. Now they can deal with the consequences. Thanks for all the support. A lot has happened since this post, and I'll update when I can. Update 1. It's been nearly a year since my original post about my family stealing my design brand, and the aftermath has been more dramatic than I could have imagined. The legal system worked slowly, but when it finally moved, it hit like a tsunami. Let me paint you a picture of how justice unfolded in that courtroom. James walked in wearing his expensive suit, that smug smile still on his face, clearly expecting another slap on the wrist like he'd gotten his whole life. Mom and Dad sat behind him, looking more annoyed than concerned, as if this was just another inconvenience they'd solve with money and connections. That changed when my lawyer started presenting evidence. First came the forged documents, with my signature dated while I was in Michigan. Then the security footage from the hospital showing me helping Grandpa Joe at the exact time I supposedly signed those papers. The look on Mom's face when they proved she was the one who forged my signature, priceless. Dad's arrogant expression crumbled when the prosecutor detailed how they'd systematically planned to steal my brand. James lost it when they showed proof he'd already started removing my original watermarks from designs, planning to register them as his own. He actually tried to interrupt the judge, arguing that as family, he had some right to my work. The judge's response? Family ties don't excuse criminal behavior, Mr. Harrison. In fact, they make your actions more reprehensible. The sentencing was beautiful to watch. James got 8 months in county jail, 3 years probation, and 500 hours of community service. But here's the part that really broke him: every top business school immediately rescinded his acceptance. His perfect future? Gone in an instant. My parents' sentencing came next. The judge was particularly harsh with Mom, since she'd actually forged the documents. When she tried to argue that she was just protecting her son's future, the judge cut her off. You weren't protecting anyone's future. You were stealing it from your other son. Both parents got 18 months probation and 30 days in county jail. They begged to serve their time on weekends to avoid embarrassment at work. The judge's response was brutal: perhaps experiencing real consequences will teach you both about personal responsibility. Dad lost his accounting job the day of his conviction. Turns out his firm had a zero-tolerance policy for fraud. Mom's social circle imploded when the story hit the local news. Their country club membership? Revoked. Their church committee positions? Asked to step down. All those carefully cultivated relationships crumbled once people knew what they'd done. But the civil suit, that's what really destroyed them financially. Tom, my friend's dad and lawyer, went after everything. The court ordered them to pay not just for the attempted theft of my brand, but for all potential lost revenue and emotional damages. They had to sell their house, their cars, most of their assets. That beautiful 4-bedroom colonial where James got everything and I got nothing? Now it belongs to someone else. The impact on their social status was devastating. Dad's business contacts stopped returning his calls. Mom's friends suddenly had excuses to skip their lunch dates. Even their oldest family friends started distancing themselves. It turns out reputations built on fake perfection shatter pretty easily. They tried declaring bankruptcy to escape the civil judgment. The court denied it after finding they tried to hide assets. That led to even more fines. Now they're living in a small apartment in the bad part of town, driving a 15-year-old car, and working jobs they would have considered beneath them a year ago. Here's where it gets really good. Remember how James had started messing with my brand? Turns out his business genius plan was to turn my artisanal design company into another dropshipping scheme. He'd already made deals with cheap overseas manufacturers to mass-produce knockoffs of my designs. Discovering this felt like finding out how deep the betrayal really went. But karma hit in unexpected ways. Those manufacturers he'd contracted? They were actually counterfeiters on multiple international watch lists. The FBI got involved because of possible connections to organized crime. James had to testify about his connections, which added another heap of legal troubles to his plate. His cellmate in county? A guy who lost his business to counterfeiters. Poetic justice at its finest. While they were all dealing with the fallout, something amazing happened with Greystone. The story of the family who tried to steal a design brand got picked up by major industry publications. Designers, artists, and creators worldwide started sharing their own stories of family betrayal and theft. My brand became a symbol of standing up for creative rights. Orders didn't just increase, they exploded. Major retailers who'd ignored my previous pitches were suddenly calling. One of the biggest department stores in New York offered me a featured spot in their designer showcase. The collection I launched there? Called a betrayal, each piece telling part of my story through abstract designs. It sold out in 3 days. Grandpa Joe got to see it all happening. Despite his Parkinson's getting worse, his mind stayed sharp as ever. He'd sit in his studio chair, hands shaking but eyes bright, giving me feedback on new designs. "You didn't just protect your work," he told me one evening. "You showed others how to protect theirs." The foundation I started in his name caught the attention of some serious players in the design world. We launched a program specifically focused on helping young creators protect their intellectual property. Every month, we help someone else stand up to theft, whether it's from family, friends, or corporations. The most satisfying part? Getting messages from my cousins about how my parents and James are doing now. James got out of county jail only to find his former business friends wouldn't touch him with a 10-foot pole. He ended up taking a job at a budget print shop, the kind that makes birthday banners and real estate signs. Every day, he has to watch other people's creative visions come to life while having none of his own. Dad's trying to rebuild his accounting career, but his conviction shows up on every background check. He's working as a junior bookkeeper at a small construction company, the same kind of a stepping stone job he used to mock others for having. Mom had to take a job as a retail clerk at the same mall where she used to shop for James's designer clothes. They tried one last desperate move. Through their court-appointed lawyer, they offered to take out a second mortgage on what little they had left to make things right. Said they'd sign a public apology, admit to everything, if I just consider letting them back into my life. The lawyer looked embarrassed even making the offer. I had Tom send them a copy of my latest magazine cover feature. The headline read, "Rising from Betrayal, How Family Theft Launched a Design Empire." No other response needed. But life had more twists in store. One of James's former business school friends reached out to me. Turns out James had been taking credit for my designs years before the theft, using my portfolio to impress people at networking events. This friend had proof, photos, emails, presentations James had given claiming my work as his own. I passed everything to my lawyer. New charges are pending. Meanwhile, Greystone's success kept growing. That little brand they thought they could steal? Now it's a full lifestyle empire. We've got collaborations with major artists, a dedicated following of over 2 million on social media, and a waiting list for our limited edition pieces that stretches months long. I renovated Grandpa's old studio into a state-of-the-art design facility, but kept his vintage drafting table right in the center. His old advertising awards share shelf space with my new ones. Every morning when I walk in, I see his old framed motto, "Create with integrity, succeed with purpose." Here's the true victory: I've created something they can never steal, a legacy of integrity. Our foundation has now helped over 50 young artists protect their work from theft. Every time I speak at design schools or conferences, I tell my story, and every time, someone in the audience comes forward with their own tale of family betrayal. Last month, something incredible happened. A major international design award, one James used to brag about someday winning, named me Designer of the Year. The ceremony was in New York, broadcast live online. My acceptance speech was simple: success is the best revenge, but integrity is the best legacy. The next day, Mom left a voicemail crying about how she watched the ceremony online, about how proud she was, how she always believed in me. Dad sent an email talking about reconciliation, family healing, moving forward together. James even wrote a letter from his new address, a shared apartment above the print shop, about how he's changed and learned his lesson. I had their messages forwarded to a special email folder labeled Consequences. Sometimes, when I'm having a particularly good day, I read them. Not out of bitterness, but as a reminder of how far I've come. Grandpa Joe's health took a turn last week. His hands shake more now, but his mind is still sharp. Yesterday, he watched me finalize designs for our biggest collection yet. You know what's better than getting revenge? He asked, with that wise look in his eyes. Building something so magnificent that their betrayal becomes nothing but a footnote in your success story. He's right, as always. My family thought they could steal my brand, but they actually gave me something priceless, the motivation to build an empire. Every setback they created became a stepping stone. Every betrayal became a building block. The irony? If they'd simply supported me from the start, I would have shared everything with them. Now they get to watch from the sidelines as Greystone becomes a global name in design. Their punishment isn't just legal or financial, it's having to live with the knowledge that they had a chance to be part of something extraordinary, and they threw it away because of greed. I've moved into Grandpa's house permanently now. The walls that once held his dreams now display both our achievements. Every morning, I walk through his garden to the studio, knowing I'm not just continuing his legacy, I'm building my own. To everyone who supported me through this journey, thank you. Your messages kept me going through the darkest days. To those facing similar battles, stand your ground. Your creativity is worth fighting for. Your vision is worth protecting. And to my family, who I know will eventually read this, I hope it was worth it. Every time you see my brand in a store, every time you pass a Greystone billboard, remember, you didn't just lose a son and brother. You lost your chance to be part of something legendary. I am no longer the invisible kid in James's shadow. I'm the one casting the shadow now.